economic perspective? Would we advocate cutting reading programs for developmentally challenged children and fund instead, on their behalf, programs that prepare them for physical labor, if it meant showing that we have indeed understood that this is a product worth producing and that is effective for the larger society? Would we cut off art and music and maybe even physical fitness classes for students whose aptitude is in science and mathematics, focusing exclusively on the quickest development in those areas in order to maximize efficiency? Would we shorten the course of general education for students who show little promise early on, thus focusing our resources on those most likely to succeed? Now, as all of us know, these questions are not merely theoretical. And I would argue that though they do not get articulated overtly, they are too often just beneath the surface in policy and funding decisions from the local to the national level. That they remain unexamined, then, is especially problematic. Perhaps the reason that these questions are not openly articulated is that we would be embarrassed to admit that we have reduced the worth of our children's education to a matter of mere economic efficiency. Yet we find ourselves embarrassed in the other direction as well. At least economic terms, and especially the terms of efficiency and production, are concrete. And education can hold its head high in the marketplace if it can at least show that it is efficient in its operations and in its contribution to the greater economic good. Talk of education as a good in itself seems not to have a very large audience anymore, if it ever did. And how long has it been since we've heard serious public discourse about education as an activity that transforms human beings, one at a time, toward their own good and toward the greater good? In fact, don't even educators find themselves embarrassed by such talk, insofar as it carries with it none of the professional prestige that is associated with economic indicators? If we are not asking these questions, then we may be implicitly accepting the reduction of education to a cog in the mere workings of economic efficiency. And the irony is that in so reducing education, it will be the cog that undoes those very workings. After all, it is a human world to which we belong, and the quality of that world, in its economic capacity and otherwise, is a function of the qualities that have been cultivated in the human beings who inhabit it. And so I would like tonight to make a modest proposal in favor of an inefficient education. I begin with a reminder of what is obvious, and therefore forever in danger of being covered over or missed. Education, in order to be what it is, must concern itself with the development of the human being. This is true not only for primary and secondary school, but for higher education as well. It is true not only for liberal education, but for vocational and professional education as well. And so education cannot be understood under the auspices of efficiency precisely because it is by its very nature time-consuming. It is time-consuming because it is by definition about change. It is about the kind of transformation that leads or brings each individual human being from one condition or state to another. To give way to the language of efficiency, then, is to misunderstand education in its very essence. With this in mind, I would like to turn to three basic points in considering my modest proposal for an inefficient education. Each of my 3 points will unfold as considerations of a modest distinction. Modest though each distinction may be, however, each is crucial to the fundamental pursuit of education and to the economy which education finally supports. Further, in developing each of my 3 points and the vision of education that they suggest, I will rely on 2 essays written by Michel de Montaigne of the education of children and of pedantry. Both essays present Montaigne's reader with a serious skepticism about the value and efficacy of a 16th century gentleman's education, and I recommend these readings to all of you. My interest in turning to them tonight, however, will be limited to recovering from Montaigne's acute observations a language for thinking and speaking about education that is as relevant today as it was over 400 years ago. In recovering this language, I hope to show indirectly how the application of economic terms to education misleads us in our thinking about the essential worth of education. I will also suggest that this misapplication of economic language to education lulls us into a false sense of what finally constitutes efficiency in education. I begin with the distinction between education aimed at producing learnedness and education aimed at cultivating learners. Now, on the face of it, the distinction between producing students who are learned and cultivating students who are learners may seem fatuous. After all, it would be reasonable to expect that one becomes learned only by being a learner. Maybe, but maybe not. The distinction I have in mind comes into focus when we consider how the intentions that shape education determine both its methods and its expectations for outcomes. The intention to produce students who are learned necessarily must focus on the students